Well, hey there, I'm Joshua Johnson, and the Nightlight is on for Friday, March 8th, 2024. Feisty, I think, is the word to describe the State of the Union address, and Joe Biden is definitely riding high as he makes a presidential campaign stop in Pennsylvania. Meanwhile, the Trump family has continued to consolidate its control over the Republican Party. We'll talk about that in a bit. Also, I wanted to get to a historical note for today. There's so much to talk about with this week and all the news in the world, but today marks 70 years since a full-throated defense of democracy and against heavy-handed government. It's something you already know about, but I think you should think about it again. It's just worth bringing up today. Remember, you can find all my social media links online at nightlightjoshua.com. How nice to see you on a Friday evening. I hope your week has been a good one. This week has been very, very interesting for me. I am delighted that the show is now on in the evenings. It's nice to have more people who are able to take part and watch live. That has been going very, very well. Hello to everybody who's watching on YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and X. Wherever you're watching, please feel free to put comments in the chat, but especially if you are on YouTube, please be sure to like the stream. The more that you interact with it by sending emoji reactions and putting comments in the chat, the easier it is, I think, for people to find it. It kind of makes YouTube notice like, oh, this is something good. We should show it to more people. So be sure to be as interactive as you feel comfortable being. If you would just drop a like in the chat, that would be fantastic. And for those of you who are watching on other social networks, I can see your comments. Feel free to put questions and thoughts in the chat. But we have a lovely group over on YouTube at Nightlight Joshua, where you can find all of our frequent flyers. Hello to, oh, Joanne, hi. New music? No, this is the same music that I've been using, although I tend to mix the music up a bit. It's so weird how the font on this just changes because it feels like it. I don't like that. Let me fix that. There we go. Good to see you, Joanne. Hello to you. Hello, Susan in the chat. Hello, Joshua and everyone. Happy Friday to you, too. Hope you've had a good week. Crystal over on Facebook, good evening to you as well. Solange the First, hello, hello. Dark Forever Clear, good evening. Oh, yes, Joanne, good point. Happy Friday and International Women's Day. Yes, indeed. I appreciate you bringing that up. Pam, hello. TGI, the Nightlight on Friday. Yes, thanks for being with us. I'm going to say this on YouTube. Hello, good to see you as well. David, over on X, listening from Fredericksburg, Virginia. Good to have you here on the chat over in Fredericksburg. Did indeed get your tweets yesterday. Thank you very much for those. Everybody watching, please feel free to jump into the chat, drop a like in if you're watching on YouTube. Tell a friend about this. And also, before we dive in, well, we'll start with the State of the Union address. So I guess I'm diving in right now. Thank you to everyone who showed up for the State of the Union live chat. I thought that the idea of doing a pundit-free live chat, where it was really just more or less you and me, kicking it around and just talking about the State of the Union address, I thought that would be a decent idea. There's enough punditry in the world. I should know, because I have been a pundit, Lord Jesus. But there's been enough punditry in the world. And I will say, I'm not anti-pundit. Sometimes just being a talking head is a network's best way of going, you've got something, I think we should talk further. Because that's what happened to me when I was in Washington hosting 1A on NPR. I got noticed by a guy named John Reese, who used to be the executive producer of Meet the Press. And he was like, would you come on our weekday cable version on MSNBC, which at the time was called MTP Daily? And I did, and they liked me, and so they invited me back, and they liked me some more, and then they booked me for a Sunday from Meet the Press, and then on from there. So I'm not anti-pundit. I am, however, pro-conversation. And I think punditry is sort of the opposite of conversation. It's a series of monologues, right? It's almost like audition monologues where you do like a short monologue in your best 16 bars. It's basically 16 bars back to back. You're kind of auditioning people's points of view, and it's not really conversational with you. And I really got a lot out of, I don't know if you did, but I got a lot out of last night's show. And I really enjoyed watching the State of the Union with you, especially since it was so freaking entertaining for an array of reasons. Don't know if it's going to be effective for what Joe Biden wants to do politically, but my, was it interesting. This man, he had his Geritol and drank his Activia and ate a whole bowl of Wheaties and was crunching on Folgers crystals before he walked into the house. And Lord Jesus, he came in like a house on fire. I was not ready for what I saw last night, but I saw it. And Lord Jesus, I was very entertained. I had plenty of moments last night where I was like, Joe, you crazy. It was really a wild speech. And he was on the campaign trail today in Philadelphia, remains just as animated as ever. Now, whether or not you liked what he said, or whether in retrospect you might feel like that didn't really hit the note that I wanted him to hit, I'd love to know. I don't know if it's gonna do for him what he wants done. There's a whole lot of daylight between now and November, so we'll see. But fascinating, such a fascinating speech. As I said, today Joe Biden was on the campaign trail again. He was in Philadelphia today, and his campaign is launching a big $30 million advertisement buy, which is kind of normal for this stage in the campaign, but there's a lot of spending that's coming up pretty quickly. They're going to be hitting the campaign trail a lot over the weekend. Kamala Harris is actually coming here. I'm in Las Vegas. Kamala Harris is actually coming here tomorrow to do some campaigning. She was in Arizona today. President Biden's going to be in Atlanta tomorrow. He's going to be in New Hampshire on Monday, Wisconsin on Wednesday. Thursday of next week, he'll be in Michigan. So the campaign is still very much in hot, campaign, hit the trail mode, particularly since now the Trump-Biden rematch is all but set. It's pretty much all over but the conventioneering when the Republicans gather in Milwaukee and the Democrats gather in Chicago. So that's kind of on a glide path to happening. How effective was the speech? Well, we should be clear. Before we talk about all this polling, and I've seen a number of polls about, well, what did people think of the speech? And I'll get to some of that in a minute. I think it's important to remember why we do the State of the Union address. The Constitution in Article 2 says that the president shall, from time to time, report to the Congress on the State of the Union. It does not have to be annual. The Constitution just says from time to time. And it doesn't have to be a speech. Thomas Jefferson went back and forth on whether to do it as a speech or just as a document. So when people say this could have been an email, Jefferson agreed. It could have been an email. We don't have to do it as a speech. But George Washington did it as a speech. John Adams did it as a speech. Jefferson was like, not sure. Then again, a lot of people said Jefferson was a terrible orator, great writer, but not great live. And so it kind of went back and forth until Woodrow Wilson in 1913 made it a speech, and it's been a speech pretty much ever since. We've only had a few interruptions, COVID being one of them, and then there were a couple of others. The Challenger disaster, they delayed it for a week. Reagan delayed it for a week. So the idea is not that there is a requirement to do the speech, nor does it have to be annual. That's just tradition. Nor is the speech written in the Constitution as something that's supposed to be political. It's supposed to just be governmental. But obviously, because everything's political now, as if it wasn't always or hasn't been for a long time, now it's very political. And it was impossible to look at that speech without seeing it in the context of the presidential race. With that said, some of the early polling data, depending on what you look at, maybe it was good, maybe it was not, just on the numbers. There's an analysis from the Washington Post of some of the polling that came out immediately after President Biden's speech. And again, this is all really quite early. There was a CNN poll, kind of like an instant poll that CNN did, that showed that before the speech, the group that they put together, kind of an array of different voters, about 45% said they felt positively about Joe Biden's policy agenda leading the country in the right direction. After the speech, it went up to 62%. So it was a significant jump, 17 percentage points. It also showed that 65% of viewers viewed the speech positively. What the Washington Post analysis notes is that 65% was lower than any speech that CNN has done polling on. The previous low was Donald Trump's 2018 State of the Union address, which was at 70%. That's still pretty high, considering, say, how low Congress's approval rating is. 70%, 65%, that's unanimous in 2024 terms, but not bad. That 35% who said that they had a very positive view was pretty much tied from last year. It was 34%. But it's not necessarily a remarkable shift over the course of it, depending on how you read the numbers. Also, back to Bill Clinton's 98 State of the Union address, viewers have shifted an average of 15 points more toward a more optimistic view from the time that he gave that speech and the time that Joe Biden gave his speech. So there's a lot of different ways to kind of slice and dice the numbers. Oh, by the way, the analysis that CNN did was 36% Democrats, 30% Republicans. Presumably, the other 34% were either independents or third-party voters. So that's some of the numbers of how the speech was received. I'd love to hear from you what you think of how the speech was received, especially those of you over on YouTube at Nightlight Joshua. Feel free to put your comments in the chat. If you're watching me, by the way, on X, you can also put your comments in the chat over there. Feel free to jump over to YouTube, where I think a majority of the conversation is taking place. But wherever you are, at least for now, I can see your comments on X. Who knows, with the way that social media moves, when I'll be able to see your comments and when I won't. Used to be I couldn't see them on X. Now I can. Next week, they may charge me per character. Who knows? So there's a lot going on after that. So Joe Biden is on the campaign trail now after giving that kind of remarkable State of the Union address. There were a number of sub-storylines that came out from the State of the Union address because there's so much that was said that it was easy for me not to state everything in the analysis after the speech. For instance, among other things, I almost missed that Joe Biden shouted out to transgender Americans and said, "We've got your back," which is, I think, the first time that a president has actually mentioned the trans community in a State of the Union address, if not the first, one of the first. That was something he said during an applause break, so it was kind of easy to miss. There were 1,000 things that kind of little details that could have made news out of that speech. The Republican response from Senator Katie Britt, who is a Republican from Alabama, I think is going to be spoofed on SNL this weekend. I will be amazed if there's not someone in a green blouse sitting in a very nice kind of HGTV looking kitchen with a kind of a breathless, halting, shocked, severely emotional rendition of her speech. I think by contrast, Joe Biden really hit the note he needed to hit to dramatically pull himself away from Katie Britt. I was kind of keeping a half eye on cable news today, and Katie Britt did not come up very much on Fox News. Joe Biden came up quite a bit, but I don't think that she did the party a lot of favors, also particularly because the State of the Union address usually is watched by people within the president's party or who are the president's supporters. So Republicans really weren't watching the State of the Union address for Joe Biden. They may have watched it for the Republican response, but I don't think that that's not really the moment to preach to the choir. That's not kind of what the State of the Union address is for. So that's done. We will see if Joe Biden continues to take whatever Geritol, Activia, Folgers, Crystals, Red Bull energy drink smoothie that he made before the speech and keep socking it to him, or whether he kind of mellows a little bit. There was, however, one hot mic moment after the State of the Union address. I missed it because the tape didn't really come out until that night and the next day. I don't know if you heard about it. I'm going to play you the hot mic moment from the Associated Press, or at least from their feed of it. As Joe Biden was walking around the floor of the House, shaking hands with different members of Congress, he had one particular hot mic moment with Senator Michael Bennet, who's a Democrat from Colorado, where he mentioned Benjamin Netanyahu and his relationship with Netanyahu. He said in the clip, and I'm going to play it for you in a second, but the audio is a little quiet, so I just want to tell you what to listen for before we say it. He said that he and Netanyahu needed to have, and I'm quoting, a come to Jesus meeting. Now, other than the fact that President Biden said that he needed to have a come to Jesus meeting with a Jewish head of state, we gonna let that slip. But the point of it had to do with aid to the Palestinian people in Gaza. During the State of the Union address, President Biden announced that the U.S. military is going to work with other nations, the UK, Canada, and other European nations, to create a humanitarian corridor overseas to dock at Gaza over the Mediterranean and augment the land and air humanitarian drops. So Gaza came up during the speech. This hot mic moment was I don't know if I'd call it a gaffe. And because he didn't say anything I think that we didn't already know he felt on some level or other, he's also kind of intimated at this and hinted at this with a number of previous official comments that he's made from the White House. But there was this hot mic moment. Let me show you now and play for you the moment that, as captured by the Associated Press, and for those of you watching the stream, you'll be able to see their captions of what was said at the bottom of the screen. But here's that hot mic moment from just after yesterday's State of the Union address.
Thanks for all the very follow each other. Don't worry, Mr. This President. Is one of the big great speech. Really great speech. I was telling your secretary, I was in Jordan and Israel this weekend, and we just, you got to keep pushing what you're doing on the humanitarian stuff and all this stuff. So
I told Bibi, let me repeat this. I said, Bibi, you know I can't come to Jesus. Sir, just hot mic, good. That was good.
So you can see when they're like, that was good. So, and again, I know the audio is very low, but you could hear him say to Senator Bennett, I told Bibi, don't repeat this, but you and I have to have a come to Jesus meeting. Now, the idea that Joe Biden did not know that he was on a hot mic, I find that hard to believe. He's been in politics for way too many years. Like, he knows you treat every single microphone as if it is always live, and you treat every corner of the House, especially during the State of the Union address, like everyone's recording all the time. So I don't know that he was caught off guard. When he was asked about it, though, at Andrews Air Force Base today before he flew to Philly, someone was like, why were you talking about it? He's like, I didn't say that during my speech. During my speech. But they were like, you said it afterwards. And he's like, well, that's because you guys were eavesdropping. How dare you drop eaves? And then they asked him, do you believe that Prime Minister Netanyahu needs to do more to aid people in Gaza? And the president said, yes, I do. So he didn't walk it back at all. He owned that he said it. I don't think it was entirely a gaffe. Maybe he was just kind of like feeling good after the speech and kind of smelling himself and like, I'm going to say what I want to say. That's possible. But we already know that Joe Biden feels that way. So I wouldn't read too heavily into that hot mic moment. And President Biden's not alone in saying that. I firmly believe that Prime Minister Netanyahu knows he is at risk of losing the peace, even if Israel wins this war, if he's not careful with how he treats the Palestinian people who, I am saying this after having no scientific data, but I can guess, hate him. This is not good for Benjamin Netanyahu. Even some of the Israeli people have made it clear that they're not happy with the way this war is being fought, and they would like Netanyahu gone as soon as this war is over. Not everyone in Israel, but there has been some polling to suggest that a number of Israelis, a significant portion of them, are done with Netanyahu, especially since just before this happened, there was that whole drama with the Israeli Supreme Court where his government tried to weaken the power of the Israeli Supreme Court, and the Israeli Supreme Court said, no, really, you can't do that. And then Hamas attacks Israel. So none of that really comes as a shock. Israel hasn't really, I don't believe, given any kind of an official response. We'll see if that continues to grow as the days go on, but I doubt that it will. I doubt that that will become a big deal because we kind of already knew. Let's flip over to Joe Biden's challenger, his opponent, Donald Trump, who is looking to get that old job back. Today, the Republican National Committee was meeting in Houston, Texas, and they voted on new co-chairs. They installed the party leaders that Donald Trump wanted. Basically, and the Washington Post describes it as a merger with the Trump campaign. And that's kind of the way that's going. Donald Trump wanted Michael Whatley and Lara Trump, his daughter-in-law, who is Eric Trump's wife. And the RNC picked them. They elected the two of them to be the co-chairs of the party. Ronna McDaniel Romney was the previous chair. Her term is up, so she stepped down. And also Chris LaCivita, who is a big advisor to the Trump campaign, is going to be the RNC's head of operations. Michael Whatley has chaired the North Carolina GOP. He has carried forward a number of the accusations about widespread voter fraud, has been very much kind of on that tip for a good long while. And this just sort of further deepens the reality that Donald Trump is in very tight control of the Republican Party. Even Ronna McDaniel Romney was chosen by Donald Trump back in 2017. So it isn't supposed to be, this isn't a shock at all. This is sort of deepening that relationship. And it also, furthermore, shows how much power Donald Trump has, because Ronna McDaniel had been having a few divides between herself and Donald Trump. And that meant her term, she left early. Like, she was supposed to stay on until 2025. She's out now. So if there's any doubt that the Republican Party in this iteration is the party of Trump, let there be no more doubt. Whether that's cool with you as a voter or not, that just is. That's just sort of the way that it is. The other big story today there's a few stories related to Donald Trump today. I'm going to run through a few of them. One of the other big stories today was that today at Mar-A-Lago, Donald Trump hosted Viktor Orban, who is the Prime Minister of Hungary, to visit his White House in exile, as it were. Viktor Orban, if that name is familiar, as the Prime Minister of Hungary, is a very, very tight ally of Vladimir Putin. He is widely known as an authoritarian leader. I found a piece from The Conversation, which is a news analysis site with articles written by academics. There's a piece written by Gabor Schering, who is a fellow at Harvard, who was a member of Hungary's parliament. And he writes about watching Hungarian democracy under Viktor Orban basically fall apart. And a lot of the things in Viktor Orban's playbook are very similar to the kind of Trump-era Republican playbook, including using the media and the press to sow division. But there's one particular piece of this article, as Mr. Schering wrote it, that I found kind of interesting. I don't want to read the whole thing to you, but near the bottom, he has a section called No Democracy with Division. And he talks about how necessary it is for divisiveness to take root before authoritarians can actually do so. And a lot of people have said that Donald Trump cannot wait to be the authoritarian president. He himself has said, in response to an interview with Sean Hannity, who asked, "Are you really going to be a dictator if you become president again?" And Donald Trump said, "Just for one day. Problem is, it only takes one day." I was amazed that the crowd who was there listening to that interview when he said it laughed, but whatever. This piece about Viktor Orban notes the way that this playbook worked in Hungary. And I found that interesting. Here's what he writes in part, quote, "They," meaning authoritarians, "bring together two types of supporters. Some hardcore authoritarian right voters are motivated by bigotry and hatred rooted in their fear of globalization's cultural threats. However, the most successful right-wing populist forces integrate an outer layer of primarily working-class voters hurt by globalization's economic threats. Throughout the 20th century, Democrats in the U.S. and left-of-center parties in Europe provided a political home for those fearing economic insecurity. This fostered a political system that engendered equality and a healthy social fabric, giving people reason to care for liberal democratic institutions. However, when the economy fails to deliver, disillusionment with capitalism morphs into an apathy toward liberal democracy. If the liberal center appears uncaring, authoritarian populists can mobilize voters against both the cultural and economic threats posed by globalization." Unquote. I find that fascinating. And I think that is worth paying attention to, especially because we see that the two top issues for Republican voters in particular are the economy at number 2 and then immigration as number 1. They kind of flip-flop back and forth between first and second, depending on what poll you look at, but basically those two. And wrapped up in the issues about the border, not only national security, but issues of national identity. And immigration is absolutely an economic issue. Who comes to the country? What work do they get? What resources do we have to spend to take care of them? And on and on. So it's all very much in the soup. And I think that this is useful advice for those who are concerned about the rise of authoritarianism, who are concerned about what a second Trump term would mean. I don't know if I buy the argument that if Donald Trump is elected, it is the end of American democracy. I don't quite buy that. I think the idea that people who support democracy won't fight for it bears no resemblance to any moment in American history. We have fought for our freedom over and over. And I just don't see, and I don't necessarily mean this to be, predicting political violence, God forbid, but I just don't think that Americans would roll over and die like that. I have a hard time believing that would happen. But I do think that his words are a worthwhile warning if that is a concern of yours. And I think that there is a playbook that we know plays out in moments when authoritarianism is allowed to rise. And I don't think it's an accident that Viktor Orban spoke at CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference, within the last few years. Viktor Orban coming to Mar-A-Lago, that is not a surprise. His association with people like this is not a surprise or a shock, and it's something to take seriously. A few other things, and then I will get to some of your comments. Actually, you know what? That's not true. Let me get to some of your comments first. And I appreciate those of you who have shared comments or dropped an emoji in the YouTube chat. Solange the First, I see your note saying somebody's got to pay Trump's legal bills. And I think you mean that in terms of the RNC. But Trump had to pay one of his legal bills today. He secured a bond over the E. Jean Carroll defamation case worth $91 million. Now, to be clear, this does not mean he's off the hook. The overall judgment in this case is, let's see, the bond is $91,630,000. And he secured the bond as a way of making sure that he is allowed to appeal. So if he wins on his appeal, as his attorneys believe that he will, or they argue that he will, then he's off the hook. But he had to post this bond first before he could move forward with the appeal. According to at least this write-up from ABC News, he got a bond for the appeals from a company called the Federal Insurance Company, which is a firm based in Virginia. It covers the $83 million judgment in the case plus interest. And so presumably if he wins, they would get that back, and then this company, Federal Insurance Company, would be able to claim that money. So he's definitely got legal bills to deal with, for sure. Mercedes, I see you on YouTube. Mercedes writes, I feel the situation in Gaza is also problematic for the U.S. The majority of the world is not with Israel. I think that's a reasonable argument, although I think it's a little more nuanced with that, and I think that's why it's so thorny. I think that the majority of the United Nations using pluralistic world is against Hamas. And I think that they are with the Israeli people. I don't know if the majority of the world is with Benjamin Netanyahu and with the current leadership at the Knesset, at Israel's parliament, the Knesset. I think that's where the split takes place. And I think even though many of the American people overwhelmingly are with the people of Israel, we're also very much with the people of Palestine. Like, none of us wants to see any of the people in the middle of this hurt. And we are a nation who has been hit by terrorism in living memory. So I think we are against Hamas. But most Americans that I at least hear and that I read coverage of, we're for both the Israelis and the Palestinians. We just want them to resolve whatever's going on and have peace. Joe Biden said last night that a two-state solution is the way forward. We can talk about that another day. I have my own questions about a two-state solution. I have my own theories about that. Today's not the day to dig into them because this show will be 11 hours long. But I do think that you are right, Mercedes, that it is problematic for the U.S., internally and externally. There was a resolution that passed the UN Security Council today calling for a ceasefire during Ramadan, which is about to start. And that was approved by the UN Security Council. I think Russia abstained from the vote and it was able to move forward. But the world is kind of ready for this to be able to move on and to kind of accelerate. So yeah, I think it's thorny. At best, it's thorny. And I don't know how much more support the United States is going to gain as time goes on. But we will see. Dark Forever Clear, I see your comment on YouTube. I'd just love to hear your thoughts on that. Is he just playing politics there? clarify what you mean by he and there. I just want to make sure that I answer the question you're actually asking. Drop another comment in the chat if you would, and I will come back to your question in just a second. I did want to, while you take a minute to do that, I wanted to get to one other development out of presidential campaign land. Don't know if you remember. Well, I hope you remember because I haven't said it that long ago. I hold the contention that the better way to talk about American politics right now is not Democrats versus Republicans. It's partisans versus nonpartisans. There are lots of Americans who want nothing to do with our current political climate. Well, this group called No Labels, maybe you've heard of them, is working to put together a 2024 presidential slate. I know it's late, but they weren't sure they were going to do it this time. They were going to wait until it looked like the Trump-Biden matchup was more cemented, and then they were going to make a decision. Well, the No Labels folks met this week to discuss whether or not there is a viable path for an independent/third-party candidate. And sure enough, today they announced that they are going to move forward with putting forward some kind of a presidential ticket. This is an organization that is aimed at providing an alternative to people who are rather disenchanted by the current slate of candidates that is out there. They put out a statement today from Mike Rawlings, who is the National Convention chair of No Labels, and the statement reads, quote, earlier today, I led a discussion with the 800 No Labels delegates from all 50 states. These citizen leaders have spent months discussing with one another the kind of leadership they want to see in the White House in 2024. They are some of the most civic-minded, thoughtful, and patriotic Americans I have ever met. They take their responsibility seriously. Even though we met virtually, their emotion and desire to bring this divided nation back together came right through the screen. I wasn't sure exactly where No Labels delegates would land today, but they sent an unequivocal message. Keep going. They voted, continuing to quote the statement, quote, they voted near unanimously to continue our 2024 project and to move immediately to identify candidates to serve on the unity presidential ticket. Every one of our delegates had their own explanation for wanting to move ahead, and then he lists some of those explanations, unquote. So that is from Mike Rawlings, who is the National Convention chair of No Labels. The idea is to put forth a candidate kind of like a Kyrsten Sinema, or a Joe Manchin, or even a Nikki Haley, somebody who they believe could peel votes off of both sides of the aisle and kind of land in the middle and unite the factions of the country who are furthest apart around someone that can kind of coalesce the American people. Here's the problem. Nikki Haley doesn't want it. Kyrsten Sinema doesn't want it. Joe Manchin says he's not running. So who's it going to be? They say they're going to find someone. They say they're going to do it quick. One of the reports that I saw today from the Wall Street Journal, excuse me, suggests, according to sources who spoke to the Wall Street Journal, that one possibility is this gentleman. His name is Jeff Duncan. He was the lieutenant governor of Georgia up until last year, this past term. He and Georgia's current and re-elected governor, Brian Kemp, had something of a falling out in the last few years, particularly over some of the, election fraud accusations and so on. And so Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan kind of went his own way. He is a lifelong Republican. I do not know what his appeal would be to disenchanted Democrats, but he is reportedly someone who's being considered. No Labels wouldn't comment. Jeff Duncan wouldn't comment on it, so it's not confirmed. But I guess that's a possibility. If you're not familiar with the No Labels Party, they also put out this book PDF called Common Sense, which explains their platform and the things that they believe in. If you look at the platform, it's interesting, or their agenda rather, it's interesting. Some of it I think makes a lot of sense. And then there are some pieces that feel kind of murky. For example, bullet point number 1, America can't solve its biggest problems and deliver the results hardworking taxpayers want, need, and deserve unless Democrats and Republicans start working together side by side on bipartisan solutions. Duh. I mean, yes, agreed. I guess maybe it's good to start with the things that they know we're going to agree with. So I guess it's fine. That's not a problem. But what else you got? Like, what do you want to do? And the agenda is kind of a blend of beliefs and proposals. For example, their agenda item number 3, Washington must stop spending so much more than it takes in. From now on, the annual budget should be reasonable and responsible, which means our national debt needs to stop growing faster than our economy. Okay, fair enough. What does that mean? Is that a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution? Is that, zeroed out spending every year? Does that mean that you cut defense spending? Does that mean that you tax the wealthy, which Joe Biden talked about during the State of the Union address? Does that mean that you roll back some previous tax cuts? Does that mean you put more money into the IRS to collect tax dollars that we're already owed that we don't get? Like, what's the actual plan? Part of it's in item number 4. Congress owes it to the American people to pass a budget every year and to do it on time. All for that. As we speak right now, Congress is kind of holding its breath because we could have another shutdown at midnight. Looks like a bill has passed to prevent that, to kind of keep the government limping along on temporary funding bills. I haven't heard yet whether or not President Biden has signed. The Senate has sent the bill to President Biden. So it looks like he is going to sign that bill tonight before the government will shut down. But what does that mean for the no labels agenda? Some of it's a little more specific. Item number 6 is about immigration and border security. America is a nation of laws, so we must immediately regain control of our borders and stop releasing migrants who enter America illegally into the country. Item number 7, we should create a path to citizenship for the dreamers and a plan to attract more legal immigrants, because more hardworking taxpayers means lower inflation and faster economic growth. So you see what I'm getting at. It's a mix of, ideas and broad strokes, but there's not a ton of specificity, and some of it does wade into very heavy issues like guns and energy security and international relations, national security. One of the items that they note some of it's challenging under their section called democracy. They call for national service, which is not a terrible idea. They say that children should have civics education. I am all for that. Item number 23 says political parties, social media companies, and government institutions should not be able to censor information they don't like. Freeze. Let's carry that forward. Suppose that social media gets to the point where anyone can create their own social network. Just by having the basic code and API, I can design, JoshNet, and you can be a member of my social network. Maybe because I am a company that works through social media, content-wise, I'm considered a social media company. And suppose, I'm trying to think of somebody, suppose Tucker Carlson wants to be on the Nightlight for whatever reason. And I say, thank you for the invitation. For the offer. I'll pass, but I'll let you know if I change my mind. Under this agenda, could Tucker Carlson come after me for censoring him? For not putting him on my show? See, the First Amendment says that private institutions are not governed by the First Amendment. It's about what government can do. It's not about what I can do as a private citizen. So at what point does this agenda protect people's right to say, I don't want to hear things that I don't agree with? I don't get that. They do talk more about the First Amendment. First Amendment protects free speech. Okay, fine. But then what does that mean for social media? Like, all of this thorniness is going to need a candidate who can really dig through the weeds of it. And I don't know who's up to that job. That is a mega job, to be able to weed through all of that nonsense. And I'm not convinced. I don't know. I don't know. We'll see. I don't know. I'm just not convinced. And then, Joanne, I see your comment on YouTube. Who teaches the civic education and what's the curriculum? Exactly. Like, what is the curriculum for civics education? I would hope that it has to do with, civics usually has to do with the nature of what it means to be a citizen. So how to register to vote, the 3 branches of government. I'm just a bill. That's all civics education. But if we're talking about political education, what are the parties? What is their history? Why do we have political parties? Are political parties even a good thing? George Washington warned us against partisanship. So why are we partisans? Things like that, I think, are really healthy in terms of civics education. But I don't know. I do not know. It feels very thorny and potentially very, very complicated. But you tell me what you think. Would you vote for an independent candidate? Are you even interested in an independent candidate running for office? Drop it in the chat. I would love to know what you think. I'm not sure whether or not America is actually quite as eager for that as it claims. I think a lot of people want better alternatives, for sure. For sure. I don't know that some guy who comes out of left field and is like, fear not, I have some money behind me and I'll be president now. Like, when do we have time to even start polling on you to determine if you should be part of the official presidential debates that air on all the networks? Like, you can't just jump in at the last split second and expect us to be all excited that you're here. You know, that's I don't see that. I don't see that. But maybe you do. Maybe there's somebody that if they ran under this no labels party, you'd be there. You would support them. Maybe it's a candidate who's already been there. Maybe it's someone who you wish would run for office. Tell me. I'm kind of interested to know if that's something you would be interested in. But the State of the Union was fascinating. And I think it's going to be an interesting next few months based on the fact that Joe Biden is taking his Geritol for real. And he is raring and ready to go. We'll see how long that keeps up. And also how Donald Trump and his surrogates respond to that. That's where it'll get really interesting. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, there are a few other stories I want to talk about. 2 international stories that I think you should know about. One having to do with Sweden and NATO. The other with one of the Western Hemisphere's most troubled countries right off our shores that looks like it is spiraling out of control. It's not an imminent problem, but I just want to tell you right quick, just so you know what's going on very briefly, because it could get real bad real fast, and I don't want it to catch you by surprise. Also, I would like your help with a story that's coming up next week. Your questions, your stories about that, particularly your personal stories, I'll tell you in a moment. And today is the anniversary of one of the most famous broadcasts in American history. If you are concerned about the Viktor Orbans of the world, or even about the potential of Donald Trump being a dictator for a day, then Edward R. Murrow must be one of your patron saints. I will play for you the commentary that brought down a senator when we come back. This is The Nightlight. I'm Joshua Johnson. Thank you for making time for me on this Friday. Remember that you can go to nightlightjoshua.com to find all of my social media links, to follow the podcast of this show, so you can listen to the show even if you cannot watch or listen live. You can also find my online merch store with Nightline branded logo and also the Gullible Ain't Sexy t-shirt, always a favorite. Thanks to those of you who have been ordering those shirts in the last few days. That means so much. You have no idea how much that means to me, as well as those of you who have included a note at the end of your order. The service I use allows you to write a note about what you like about the show and what you enjoy. So for those of you who have sent notes, that really means, you have no idea how much that means to me. So thank you so very much. You'll also find the link to my Substack with more of my original essays and articles. And you can contact me through that page. All the links you need are at nightlightjoshua.com. Before we continue, I did want to let you know about a program coming up next week that I'd love your help with. I would like to hear your stories about evangelical Christianity, particularly about leaving evangelical Christianity. There have been a number of scandals involving evangelical churches, not the least of which being the associations between evangelicals and Donald Trump politically. That, we know, over the last few years has turned many people off from an array of more conservative Christian denominations. There are also issues internal to those denominations. Back in 2019, the Houston Chronicle and the San Antonio Express News exposed hundreds of cases of sexual abuse within the Southern Baptist Convention, which is the largest Protestant denomination in the country, that had been either swept under the rug or that were being slow-walked. That led to an upheaval at the Southern Baptist Convention that is still not over. Just this week, a number of sex abuse survivors claim that the Southern Baptist leadership is lying about whether the federal investigation is still going on. The Southern Baptist Convention has said that they are basically clear of these federal investigations, at least for the most part, but a number of survivors say that that is not the case, and so now they are going back and forth as to whether or not the Southern Baptist Convention is telling the truth. Over the last few years, the number of Americans who describe themselves as not having any religious affiliation, or nuns, N-O-N-E, not the woman wearing a habit, N-O-N-E, has been going up. Pew Research put out yet another report about religious nuns in the last few months. Back in January, late January, they put out their report. According to Pew Research, about 28% of adults in the United States claim no religious affiliation. Back in 2007, it was just 16%. Among those folks, the overwhelming majority, 63%, say they are just nothing in particular. 20% describe themselves as agnostic. 17% describe themselves as atheists. And as for the reasons why they call themselves nuns, a significant number of them just express doubt and skepticism as to whether or not their religious teachings are sound. But 55% also cited the organizations themselves or the people that they associate with those religions. And then 44% said that they just see no need or have no more time to be practicing people of faith. This coming week, I'm going to be interviewing NPR national political correspondent Sarah McCammon. She has a new book out about this very topic. And one of the things that Sarah McCammon covers is how our cultural dividing lines affect our politics, including religion. Sarah McCammon's new book is called The Ex-Evangelicals: Loving, Living, and Leaving the White Evangelical Church. I would love to hear from you on this. If you have experiences with evangelical Christianity, whether you are involved now, have been involved in the past, are considering future involvement, have struggled with your faith as a member, as a minister, a congregant, a donor, a deacon, a teacher, a preacher, or just someone who stays out of its way, whether your experiences have been good, bad, or otherwise, I would love you to share what you know. What have your experiences been like in evangelical Christianity? Also, if you have questions for Sarah McCammon about the politics of evangelical Christianity or just about the nature of evangelical Christians in America today, this is one of the first books, at least that I have seen, that really digs deeply into this issue, including from Sarah McCammon's own personal experiences, struggling with her own upbringing in an evangelical church and reconciling it with what she saw in the world around her. So email me. The address is joshua@nightlightshow.com. Please be sure to include where you live and how to pronounce your name, just in case I mispronounce it. And however much of your story you care to share, I would be honored to have that on the program. So, Sarah McCammon is going to be my guest next week on The Nightlight. She and I will record the interview early next week, so definitely get your comments in as soon as possible. Share what you know about the evangelical church in America today. The email address is joshua@nightlightshow.com, and I will bring you my conversation with Sarah McCammon on Wednesday. Let me get back to a few more of your comments before we keep going with the next thing. Holly, I see you wrote on YouTube, has that ever worked? Third-party candidates have historically been little more than spoilers. Right. I guess it depends on what you consider a third party. I mean, George Washington's party, the Whig Party, doesn't really exist anymore. There have been third-party candidates that work in some places, in some city elections, but not really on a presidential level. And yes, that is exactly what Democrats are concerned about, particularly because Joe Biden hasn't fully, I think, overcome the concerns about him being the nominee going forward and being able to defeat Donald Trump. So the whole no labels thing is not popular with the partisans because it's a spoiler thing. But then again, RFK could be a spoiler to Donald Trump or to Joe Biden. He's still in the race. You never know. But no, that has not ever in that way worked. Also, Holly, I see your comment further down. I would like to see Schoolhouse Rock rebooted with subjects like how elections work now. that feels like an SNL cartoon, kind of. But I understand your point. I understand what you're trying to say. Yeah, I think that would be cool. Susan on YouTube, what do you all think about the idea of ranked choice voting? I think ranked choice voting can work. They use ranked choice voting in the San Francisco Bay Area. I was there when they switched to ranked choice voting. I think it can be fine. I think it forces candidates to appeal to a broader swath of people. I think ranked choice voting probably works better for smaller elections, like municipal or county elections, just because it takes a little bit of explaining that you want people to pick their top 3 options in order and then walk away. Like even some of the people who are who are supporters, I hate that word, proponents, supporters, that's news speak. It's a bad habit. Supporters of ranked choice voting have a hard time explaining it in plain English. So how does this work? Pick your top 3 candidates. The person you would vote for if you couldn't vote for anyone else, that's number 1. And then pick 2 and 3. Just rank them. Okay, then how do you pick the winner? And then explaining the math. They never do that well. So I think it could work, but I don't see, I don't know. Pam Wiley on YouTube writes, I would love a third choice. I'm not sure the middle roads will appeal to all independents, depending on which way they lean, right or left, on specific issues. I hear that. And I think that's one of the challenges of being an independent candidate is you've got all of these different people who are not particularly appealing across the board, and they're not really useful in that way. You know what I mean? They don't really, it's like they're enough to siphon independents who are close to one candidate or another, but who aren't sold on either candidate. And that doesn't really help anyone. It just sort of pulls support away rather than creating an alternative. It just sort of siphons away from the options they don't want. So I don't know how that's supposed to work, but you never know. If they find the right candidate, I mean, all bets could be off. Oh, the other thing I forgot to mention, former Senator Joe Lieberman of Connecticut, who is one of the co-chairs of No Labels, was on Today with Neil Cavuto on Fox Business Network. And he said they are not looking to bring like a Cornel West or a Robert F. Kennedy Jr. or Jill Stein, who's running with the Green Party. Cornel West is running as an independent also. They're not looking to absorb their campaigns into the No Labels party. That's not the idea. They're not like funding an existing campaign. They want to begin a new campaign with a different candidate who could appeal to more of the American public. Just to clarify that. So that's not, they're looking to start something new. And I don't know how they're going to do it. Not impossible, but I don't know how they're going to do it. 2 international stories I wanted to tell you about, and I am going to let you go. I'm not going to keep you long. It's Friday. Fridays are for dancing. And honestly, Fridays are also for, speaking of dancing, well, I'll tell you later. There's too many things I want to talk about. I'll tell you about that later. Just remind me one Friday that I said that Fridays are for dancing. We're not going to do it now, but just remind me that I said that, and I will explain to you why I said that, because it's already in my brain, and I will tell you about it later. We'll see who remembers. Anyway, 2 other international stories that I wanted to talk to you about. One of them we were going to talk about yesterday, but we needed to move on because of the State of the Union address. You probably heard by now that Sweden has officially joined NATO. Sweden's prime minister was in the gallery at the State of the Union address during President Biden's speech. He acknowledged Sweden's prime minister fairly early in the speech, and now it is a done deal. NATO is now an alliance of 32 countries. Finland joined just before Sweden, and now Sweden is the latest member. The Secretary General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, said, among other things, quote, after over 200 years of non-alignment, Sweden now enjoys the protection granted under Article 5, the ultimate guarantee of allies' freedom and security. Sweden brings with it capable armed forces and a first-class defense industry. Sweden's accession makes NATO stronger, Sweden safer, and the whole alliance more secure. Today's accession demonstrates that NATO's door remains open and that every nation has the right to choose its own path, unquote. The ceremony to add Sweden's flag to the others at NATO headquarters in Brussels, Belgium, takes place on Monday at NATO headquarters and at the various NATO commands across North America and Europe. Now, if you're like me, you may have grown up in America with very goofy, stereotypical images of Sweden And it may not make a lot of sense to you why Sweden would be such a military power. And I think that that's one of the worst things about America's idiotic stereotyping of other countries. Because Sweden and Finland are actually way useful to NATO. Way useful. There's a great piece in the Washington Post that breaks down the reasons for this in 4 different maps. One of the maps that is in this article, I think, kind of makes the whole thing make a lot more sense. Let me see if I can size this to get the whole map in view. There we go. All right, so if you look at the map of northeastern Europe, right where it butts up against Russia, so you got Russia here, and then right next to Russia is Finland. Finland and Russia share an 800-mile border from the Baltic Sea to the Barents Sea. And just so at the northwestern tip of Russia, you have Finland. And then just next to Finland is Sweden. So the presence in the Baltic Sea, around the Baltic Sea, is vital for NATO. Now, previously, these 2 countries weren't in the alliance. So if something was to happen, if Russia was to get a little froggy, they would leap into Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, the Baltic states. Now, there is this other nation, Finland, that is not only a significant border state for Russia, but also that has a military history of fighting against Russia in the last few decades, in I believe it was the 80s. And also Sweden kind of right next to it. They have a long military history in the past. One of the things that some Finnish people remember, and there's a great BBC piece that talks about this, is that the Soviets invaded Finland back in 1939. They held out till March of 1940, but lost an eastern province called Karelia to Russia. Russia didn't occupy Finland, but it cost Finland 10% of its landmass. Does that sound familiar? That's exactly what Ukraine is dealing with right now for the second time. Remember, Russia already annexed Crimea, which is a peninsula in Ukraine, back in 2014. Then they invaded again in 2022. So Finland has living memory. There are old Finnish people who have living memory of this, who survived that earlier attack. And they know exactly what this would mean to them. As for Sweden, Russian bomber planes threatened Sweden back in 2013 as if they were attacking the Swedish capital of Stockholm. And then NATO came to kind of show up and be like, hey, enough, please go home, go sit down. 2014, there were reports that a Russian submarine was off the waters of the Stockholm archipelago in the shallows off Stockholm. 2018, the Swedish government sent pamphlets to every household called If Crisis or War Comes. Those had not been sent out since the height of the Cold War. Or since just after the end of the Cold War, I should say, in 91. So this is also living memory for Swedish people. And but for the invasion of Ukraine, Finland and Sweden would never have said, okay, let's get into NATO, because they had made it clear they didn't want to. And there are even some people in Finland and Sweden who aren't really digging this option because their non-alignment made them good neutral ground. And it gave them a reputation as arbiters of international disputes. Now they can't have that as much. But because of Russia's aggression in Ukraine, and because of the support that Russia has from a number of other nations around the world, particularly China, although China's support is highly conditional, and I do not believe it will last through every crisis. But even with that, Finland and Sweden were like, okay, we remember what happened last time with Russia. And Vladimir Putin has made no secret of his desire to bring back the old glory days of the Soviet Union. And they remember what it was like dealing with Soviet Russia. And so they're in now. I think that this is also important for the United States because remember that comment from Jens Stoltenberg where he talked about Article 5? Article 5 of the NATO Charter says that if any NATO nation is attacked, all the other NATO members ride to their rescue. An attack on one is an attack on all. Guess how many countries in NATO have ever invoked Article 5? One country. It happened on September 11th, 2001. So the idea that the NATO border growing to include two nations that are Russia's neighbors that have living memory of Russian aggression directly affects the United States. Particularly because Donald Trump has said that America's support in NATO should be conditional on whether or not NATO allies pay up. Well, what happens if a NATO ally is so deep in a military campaign that their economy requires them to put money toward food, toward just feeding their own people, and they don't have the cash to kind of meet their NATO obligation before the bank closes? Is the U.S. going to pull its troops out? These become very real issues if Donald Trump wins the White House again. And maybe you as a voter are okay with that. Remember, earlier this week we talked about that AP NORC poll that came out that said that Americans want the U.S. to be less active in all of the world's problems. The latest AP NORC poll showed that only about 23% of U.S. Americans believe that the U.S. should be more active in solving the world's problems. 40% say we should be less active. 36% say it's about right. And as it relates specifically to the war between Ukraine and Russia, overall, 36% say we are a little too active. 22% say we should be more active. 40% say it's about right. Roughly the same numbers with the war between Israel and Hamas. So there is plenty of concern, a statistically significant amount of concern in this country about our involvements overseas. So if the Ukrainians cannot beat back Russia, and if Putin can afford to keep doing what he's doing, and Finland and Sweden get targeted, we are at war. Nikki Haley's been saying this on the campaign trail too, before she suspended her campaign, and she's correct. It's just a fact. The U.S. has an obligation. We would instantly have to deal with a war on our hands, or at the very least with sending troops overseas. And that could get messy for an array of different reasons, to say the very least. So, worth keeping an eye on. Absolutely worth keeping an eye on. The other story that's going on right now has to do with Haiti. Haiti has been a basket case of a country for a very long time. I say this with no ego because I grew up in South Florida, which has a very large Haitian and Haitian American community. And Haiti is beloved by many people in South Florida, including myself. I've been to Haiti. I covered an earthquake recovery story, a disaster recovery story in Haiti years ago. But it's basically about to be a fallen state. The latest word from the United Nations is that the Haitian healthcare system is near collapse. If you want a picture of what the unrest in Gaza would look like, if it were closer to the U.S., if it was all internal rather than partly external, Haiti. What happened in Haiti basically is that in 2021, its president, Jovenel Moïse, was assassinated. The prime minister, Ariel Henry, became the leader of Haiti, but never held elections again. And there are people who want Ariel Henry out. Prime Minister Henry says that it's too dangerous on the streets to hold elections. When the assassination happened, the gang violence in Haiti that was already bad exploded and got dramatically worse, to the point where, for example, gangs were in control of the ports where ships couldn't even dock. Planes couldn't take off. It is nuts in Haiti right now. It is awful. Secretary of State Antony Blinken recently had some conversation with the Haitian prime minister. The State Department is trying to get Haiti to support some kind of a transition, an election, so that Haiti can begin to move on and so that other countries can begin to provide more consistent assistance to Haiti. They've been trying for well over a year to make this happen, and it's not really quite popping off. Yesterday, Haiti's government said that they were going to extend a state of emergency around Port-au-Prince, the capital of Haiti, for another month. Curfews will be taking effect. The health system, according to the UN, is just about to collapse in many of the same ways that we've heard that the health system in Gaza has long since collapsed. So this is another humanitarian crisis in the making. Plus, it's also just kind of a wildly corrupt, untrustworthy government right now. Remember I said that Haiti's president, Jovenel Moïse, was assassinated in 2021? Just last month, a judge indicted a number of people for Jovenel Moïse's murder, his assassination, including his widow and some of his political aides. They are now facing charges for his assassination. So Haiti is an issue. Haiti is a thing right now. We're not talking about it much because we don't talk very much about Haiti. But it is one of those things that I would just keep an eye on in case you suddenly hear like, oh my God, Haiti. And everyone's like, where? What happened? What happened? Now you know what happened. I don't know what the U.S. should do about this. I don't really know what the U.S. can do about this. I don't know how much latitude the U.S. is going to have to really be active in Haiti compared to everything else that's going on. Because again, remember, Americans, the poll I just read you, don't want America to be everywhere doing everything all at once. We've got enough to deal with, I think, at the southern border, which is a significant humanitarian and economic challenge of its own. Israel is still at war with Hamas. Ukraine is still at war with Russia. We still have the potential for China to remain even more active on the world stage than it already is. There are other authoritarians in Europe who would love to use the United States as an example of why this notion of liberal democracy is no longer viable. So there's enough to deal with right now. And I don't know if the political or military will is there to do anything in Haiti. Kenya is one nation that some of Haiti's leaders have been talking to try to get more help. Whether that's going to come through, who knows? But I don't know. I don't know how far that's going to fly. I just don't know how far it's going to fly. Anyway, wanted you to know about those two stories just because they are, I think, going to continue to percolate. I wish they would. I don't know what's going to become of those, but they are going to remain active for quite some time. Let me wind down a little bit and get to a few more of your comments in the chat, and then I did have a few other things I wanted to play for you. Oh, Evan, I see your comment on X. Hello. Miss you on 1A, Joshua. Thank you, Evan. I really do appreciate that. 1A is a great show. I remain in prayer for my old station, WAMU. They just had to lay off a bunch of people, and it's not clear what's going to become of my old station, but we'll see. Actually, there have been a number of NPR stations that have been in trouble. Colorado Public Radio just had layoffs. WBUR's CEO just wrote to donors saying that they are on the brink of having to make some cuts if donors and the public don't offer more support. So I don't know. I don't know if I left at the right time, because I left a few months before COVID hit. So I don't know if my time at 1A could have lasted any longer than it did. But I'm glad that you liked it while I was there. So thank you. That does mean a lot. I want to remind you, by the way, that this Sunday is daylight saving time. Spring forward, overnight. I would say, wind your clocks forward. Your iPhone will update overnight automatically to spring itself forward. Every time this comes up, people are like, why don't we get rid of daylight saving time? Right. Well, there actually, just so you know, there is a bill to get rid of daylight saving time. Who knows if it's going to move forward, but the Sunshine Protection Act was reintroduced in Congress in the spring of 23. It is still pending. Senator Marco Rubio, who is a Republican from Florida, reintroduced it. There is a companion bill from Congressman Vern Buchanan, also a Republican from Florida. And they do have some bipartisan support. If you look on the bill status page, you can see a bipartisan list of people who support the bill. President Biden has not really indicated how he leans on this issue, so it's unclear whether or not it does become law. The interesting thing about this, and I learned this from an NPR News write-up, most everyone hates daylight saving time. The question is, if we got rid of it, what time will it be then? Do we go back to standard time, or do we just leave it at daylight saving time? The bill, the Sunshine Protection Act, would leave us on daylight saving time permanently. That would be the time. But depending on who you ask, we're better off on standard time. According to the NPR write-up that I saw, even though everyone agrees that getting rid of daylight saving time would be a lovely thing, apparently doctors and scientists say that we're better off on standard time because it gives us more light in the morning, which is healthier for our sleep cycles. The bill's sponsors, including Senator Rubio, say that we should stay on daylight saving time permanently, not standard time. That's because it would give us more light in the evening, and that would encourage people to go out at night and do more things like spending more money. Convenience stores, for example, have testified before Congress that when clocks are set to daylight saving time, that they see more people spend more money. Really? Is that? I guess that's the, That seems like an interesting reason to leave it on daylight saving time instead of going back to the potentially healthier standard time. I'm not sure I'm a fan of that. I don't even know if it matters to some of y'all. Like some people don't feel one way or the other that daylight saving times matters, and they feel like I'm tired no matter what time it is. So maybe they just don't care. But if it's a matter of people's health versus the economy, I don't know. Maybe you see it differently. I'm not sure what the answer is, but all I know is that I'm ready to be done with daylight saving time. So, spring forward, Sunday, spring forward. Don't let that make you mess up your schedule enough. At least it won't mess up your schedule enough to miss the Oscars, which are this Sunday also. A lot of big movies nominated. Barbie did not get the nods for Best Actress for Margot Robbie or Best Director for Greta Gerwig that I thought they would get, but that's the Oscars for you. Everyone seems to think that Oppenheimer is going to just walk away with everything. I thought Oppenheimer was a fantastic movie, but I haven't seen most of the other movies that are even nominated for Best Picture. I'm not even sure that I know what the nominees for Best Picture are. And matter of fact, I don't know what the nominees for Best Picture are. Let me just take a look. Now I am actually curious as to know what the heck of the nominees are. Best Picture. What's nominated for Best Picture this year? Best Picture nominees are American Fiction, Anatomy of a Fall, Barbie, which would be awesome, The Holdovers, Killers of the Flower Moon, Maestro, Oppenheimer, Past Lives, Poor Things, and The Zone of Interest. I mean, of those movies, I saw Oppenheimer. I haven't seen Maestro. I saw Oppenheimer and I saw Barbie. Of those two movies, I think, God, both of them were so good. Barbie moved and surprised me much more than Oppenheimer did. But Oppenheimer was a remarkably engrossing movie. I thought Oppenheimer was impressive. Barbie was remarkable. Does that make sense? At least to me. That's my view. I don't think I've seen any of the other films. I'd like to see Holdovers and Killers of the Flower Moon and Maestro and Poor Things, but that's the only one that I've actually seen. But I don't know. I came out of Barbie and I was like, this movie spoke to me. I love that film. I did an episode of the podcast before this show was a live video extravaganza, early in the life of the Nightlight, about the Barbie movie, where I summarized the film for those who haven't seen it. And at this point, maybe if you haven't seen it, you're probably not going to. And then giving my take on who the actual villain of the movie was. A lot of people, when the film came out, said that the villain was the patriarchy. I thought that was incorrect. Patriarchy comes up a lot in the story. It's stated materially in the film. But I thought the actual enemy of the movie, the actual antagonist of the movie, was way worse than patriarchy. Way worse. And it's something we all deal with, and it's something we all have to fight against. And God knows, even though I cannot relate to what it's like to be a woman in America, I absolutely can relate to what the actual antagonist of Barbie was. Go check out the podcast. It's one of the very early episodes of The Nightlight, wherever you get your podcasts, and you'll find it there. Richard, I see your comment on YouTube. Killers of the Flower Moon was quite eye-opening. That's what I heard from everybody who saw it. They were like, man, you got to see this movie. I didn't know this story existed. That's part of why I looked forward to seeing it. I would like to see it. Solange the First says, my daughter was blown out of the water by Zone of Interest. That good? Okay. I really don't know much about Zone of Interest, but now I may need to go check it out. And then Joanne, I see your comment. Off to finish watching Killers of the Flower Moon. Okay. I do know a number of people who watched it and they were like, awesome, Scorsese, DiCaprio, just Titanic, amazing movie, just phenomenal film. I didn't mean Titanic as a pun. DiCaprio, Titanic. Titanic as in big, amazing film. I didn't mean that as a pun. Holly, I see your comments on YouTube. Poor Things was a better companion piece to Barbie than Oppenheimer. I bet it was. They probably tonally felt a lot more alike than Oppenheimer. Although I saw Oppenheimer in 70 millimeter. Vegas was one of the few theaters on earth really that had that 70 millimeter film. And I saw it there and was just like, oh, every movie should look like this. It was a masterpiece. Visually, I liked the back and forth, the way it played with time. Some people didn't, I did, but I really liked it. I really, really liked it. One more thing, and then I will let you go for the week, and then I will dismiss you. This is a busy weekend. There's all kinds of events and anniversaries. There's the campaign going on. And through it all, there's a lot of us who are concerned about the future of democracy. One of the big themes of this show is the future of democracy, of course. Well, tomorrow, March 9th, marks 70 years since the American people, millions of Americans, heard CBS newsman Edward R. Murrow say this.
Familiar with the history of his country can deny that congressional committees are useful. It is necessary to investigate before legislating. But the line between investigating and persecuting is a very fine one, and the junior senator from Wisconsin has stepped over it repeatedly.
That junior senator he's talking about was Senator Joseph McCarthy, a Republican from Wisconsin. Senator McCarthy made his bones in the world by leading the charge in rooting out what he alleged was un-American communist activity in various institutions in the United States, particularly the arts, the media, Hollywood, and higher education. Sound familiar? Edward R. Murrow, on his program, See It Now, went after McCarthy and his whole witch hunt. And on March 9th, 1954, he did an entire episode of See It Now devoted to Senator Joseph McCarthy's hearings and the witch hunts against Americans that he did not like. Now, depending on what account you look at, Edward R. Murrow blew the doors off of all this. But there's a great piece from Joseph Campbell, not that Joseph Campbell, Professor Joseph Campbell, who teaches communication at American University's School of Communication, who goes through and shows Edward R. Murrow was not the first person to bring up all of this about Joseph McCarthy. He's just the one who got the most credit for it. Professor Campbell notes that if you look through the history, it also came up at least twice beforehand from people who kind of got raked for doing it. First was a guy named Drew Pearson, who was a muckraking journalist, a syndicated columnist, and just kind of didn't have the popularity or the polish of Edward R. Murrow. He was kind of people didn't particularly like him. And he went after Joseph McCarthy in a column in February of 1950, 4 years before Edward R. Murrow made that famous commentary, and went after some of the income tax filings of Joseph McCarthy and broke down some of the claims. According to Professor Campbell, McCarthy, who was kind of a big dude, confronted Pearson in December of 1950 after a private dinner party and assaulted him. He either punched him or slapped him or kneed him in his nether region, in his goods and services, as it were. And so that was that with Mr. Peterson. Beyond that, there was another guy named James Wechsler, who was the editor of the New York Post, which, unlike now, was a liberally leaning newspaper before it was purchased and pulled to the political right. Back in 1951, the New York Post did a 17-part series about Joseph McCarthy. I love the closing line. Refers to Joseph McCarthy, who liked to tie one on, as, quote, a drunk at a party who was funny half an hour ago, but now won't go home, unquote. I'm going to use that. That led Senator McCarthy to pull Mr. Wechsler before the Senate subcommittee and grill him about his former association with a communist news group. But that seemed to have not had too much punch to it. I think the point of this is not to knock down Edward R. Murrow, not to take anything from him for this. But I think that when we look at the issues with democracy today, it's very easy to wonder what's going to do something, particularly for people who are concerned about Donald Trump. What's going to stop him? Is it going to be this court case or that court case? Or are they going to keep him off the ballot in that state or that Supreme Court ruling? Or is it going to be this thing that disqualifies him under this amendment? Like, what's the one shoe that's going to drop? And history shows us over and over, there is no one shoe. There's never one shoe, ever. What was the one shoe that brought about enfranchisement for women or enfranchisement for African Americans? Enfranchisement for women, women's suffrage, was connected to the effort to repeal prohibition, the 18th Amendment. That helped get the 21st Amendment passed because women were able to be a newly enfranchised group of voters. What brought about civil rights for African Americans? Was it just the I Have a Dream speech? No. There was a huge movement before that and a huge movement after that to defend the civil rights movement. What about same-sex marriage? Was it just the one ruling, Obergefell versus Hodges in 2015? Of course not. It was every encounter with every same-sex couple by every person who realized, oh my God, you have the same stupid shouting matches with your partner that I have with my spouse. Why are you not allowed to be as miserable as we are? And then eventually the American people kind of got their heads around it and they were like, okay, fine. And so when the case came before the Supreme Court, the country had changed dramatically. That's how things happen. And I get tired of good, well-meaning people wondering what's going to make the difference. When is the Messiah going to land and fix all of this? That's your job. You are it. And it's not your job. All at the same time. It's no one person's job. Edward R. Murrow gets credit for it because he was on television. And in the 50s, television was the media. If Edward R. Murrow said it, it was so. But he wasn't the first. And I think as we look at the future of democracy, as we look at the future of the country, whichever way you want the country to go, which is totally your business, please, 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 do not stress yourself out by worrying about the moment that things are going to change. That's like planting a seed and digging it up every 2 weeks and going, are you a tree yet? Stop doing that to your country. We know that's not how America works, but we know America works. Dr. King said, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice. He ain't never lied. It always takes time. That's why part of me, in even looking at this election this year, I've begun giving myself permission to start thinking about 2025, because I don't want to sit in this moment and feel like it's a slow motion train wreck and I'm just waiting for the moment when it just blows my car off the track because I'm just sitting there waiting to get hit and not even bothering to start the engine. That's not the way life works, and that's not the way democracy works. Don't do that to yourself. There's much more we can do. Get on with your life and do what you can with the knowledge that even in those big moments that we ascribe to one person, there's an army behind them that paved the way. Having said all of that, Edward R. Murrow's commentary is still pretty cool. So I wanted to leave you with the last little bit of what he said at the end of that episode of See It Now, March 9th, 1954, sticking it to Joseph McCarthy. Here it is.
His primary achievement has been in confusing the public mind as between the internal and the external threats of communism. We must not confuse dissent with disloyalty. We must remember always that accusation is not proof, and that conviction depends upon evidence and due process of law. We will not walk in fear one of another. We will not be driven by fear into an age of unreason if we dig deep in our history and our doctrine, and remember that we are not descended from fearful men, not from men who feared to write, to speak, to associate, and to defend causes that were for the moment unpopular. This is no time for men who oppose Senator McCarthy's methods to keep silent, or for those who approve. We can deny our heritage and our history, but we cannot escape responsibility for the result. There is no way for a citizen of a republic to abdicate his responsibilities. As a nation, we have come into our full inheritance at a tender age. We proclaim ourselves, as indeed we are, the defenders of freedom wherever it continues to exist in the world. But we cannot defend freedom abroad by deserting it at home. The actions of the junior senator from Wisconsin have caused alarm and dismay amongst our allies abroad and given considerable comfort to our enemies. And whose fault is that? Not really his. He didn't create this situation of fear, he merely exploited it, and rather successfully. Cassius was right. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves. Good night, and good luck.
Edward R. Murrow on March 9th, 1954. We are not descended of fearful men. We are not. And I do like that quote from Julius Caesar, although I wish he would have quoted the whole line. The fault, dear Brutus, lies not in our stars, but in ourselves, that we are underlings. If you feel like you're being run over by the pace of history and all the drama of democracy, you don't have to be an underling. You have much more agency than you think. And the good news is you don't have to do it alone. That's why you're here. That's why you got all these wonderful people here on the chat in the country who are interested in talking to you and being part of moving the country forward. We're not descended from fearful people, and we don't have to be fearful now. I am so glad that you made time for me this week. Thank you so much for blowing up this live stream. Come on back Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Eastern. Remember Sarah McCammon's book, The Evangelicals. Share what you know about your experiences in or outside of evangelical Christianity. Joshua at nightlightshow.com. I will collect as many of your stories as I can over the weekend. Until we meet again, I'm Joshua Johnson. Thanks for making time for me. Enjoy your weekend. And as always, my friends, keep on shining, because someone, somewhere, needs your light right now. Good night and good luck.